okay, isn't my memory's like...
Alright, so it's recording soon. Start whenever. In case you were dying and you
You're not assessment. I feel like to a range yesterday, and I was like screen show.
Oh, I love when you find out.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm like, so you did answer, and then I just give up.
Oh, my heart.
Did you tell me they just kept being like, yeah, that would like before, or like, hey, you want to see somewhere in just refund what that means. That's a pretty long one.
Is that a sticker or? Okay. Sticker.
I don't to say that.
Are you going to sit here?
Yeah. Yeah? That's good. Then got me hooked up. So you can hear me. I'll probably move around.
Okay, perfect.
And there's so many.
Some boys really
Yeah. He was saying that he was going to hear me better here. And then I'll move around. That's my voice level. So that's never saying that
Okay, gang. We are so blessed. This is my first time meeting Marnie Huffington's Green, Huffman, sorry. And through the grapevine, I heard that Marnie was traveling all over the world teaching this method. And I just, through Dan Riggins and an old student of mine, and through Deanna, I was like, how can I find somebody who can bring this work alive? And here it is. So without further ado, we're going to go right to 11:50. And did we start the?
Yeah, it's all ready.
So just feeling so blessed and so grateful. Okay, thank you.
Hi everyone, so nice to meet you. Happy Wednesday, today Wednesday?
Yes.
Is it alright if I put you all on the spot first? Can we just do quick introductions? After we do introductions, my photographic memory will then reverse it backwards your name and what year you're in. So we'll see if I can get everyone's, no, I'm not trying to. But I would just love to know your name, what year you are at Naropa, and where you were born. Pressure. Name, what year you are in the program, and where you were born. So who wants to start us out?
I'm Francesca. I'm a first year mindfulness track for transpersonal psych, and I was born in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Beautiful. Nice to meet you.
I'm Sam. I'm also in the mindfulness track of the transpersonal counseling program, second year though, and I was born in Baltimore, Maryland.
I'm Sarah, first year mindfulness transpersonal, and I was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
I'm Sean, second year in the mindfulness track. I was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
I'm Allison, and I am doing clinical support for Diane. I graduated from this program in 2013, and I was born in Rye, Colorado.
Bye.
Yeah.
South?
Yes, so.
Hi, I'm Greg. I'm in transpersonal third year, and I was born in Palo Alto, California.
I'm Jessa, first year, and I was born in Seattle, Washington.
I'm Nicole, I'm first year mindfulness, and I was born in San Diego, California.
I'm Lisa, first year mindfulness program, and I was born in Korea. I'm Jessie, first year mindfulness, New Orleans.
I'm Maria. I finished psychology the last year in Spain, and I was born in Spain in Madrid.
I'm Holly, second year, born in Chicago.
I'm Michelle, first year, and I was born in Denver.
Alex, second year mindfulness. I was born in Salt Lake City.
I'm Andrew. I was born in Valparaiso, Indiana. I'm a third year.
I'm Kaylee, second year mindfulness, and I was born in Youngstown, Ohio.
Allison, second year mindfulness. I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
This is so cool.
Christine, first year mindfulness, and I was born in San Jose, California.
Hannah, first year, born in Sonoma, California.
I'm Brittany. I'm a third year, and I was born in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I'm Allie. I'm a first year transpersonal and I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Nice. Thank you guys. Okay.
I'm Diane. I just have to say I was born in New York City.
Francesca, Sam, no, just kidding. Yeah, I know. I'm Marnie Huffman Green, and I'm from DC. I have quite a fun connection to your awesome program, so I'm sure maybe some of you have done an internship with other Smithy students. So I was a Smith grad, and in the early 2000s, I'm from DC, I was in school in Massachusetts, and we had an interesting program where you were in school for 3 summers and you do your internship anywhere in the world. And I wanted to go to California, I wanted to go to Seattle, I wanted to go to New Mexico, and I got Boulder. I drove out here in 2001, didn't know anyone, did my internship at the mental health center, and my first 4 friends were Naropa transpersonal interns as well. So I learned to bow in. I wasn't sure if we were going to start today bowing, but thanks for doing introductions about where you're from. You guys, I'm super passionate about this model. I'll try to contain myself. It's not just a model, it's a way of being, and I kind of live, breathe FFT. And when I was talking to Diane about what would make a sense for you guys and what I want to bring, is I want to just tell you a little bit about my journey to FFT, a little bit about the history of evidence-based programs and what that means, how FFT got started, where we are in the world, and then kind of rock out a little bit in the clinical model. But I want to leave a lot of time for questions. I also, interrupt me anytime. If I start talking too fast, maybe Diane can throw something at me, which I know is not very mindful. But
it won't
again,
be too fast unless somebody else does.
Yeah, New York and DC, you know. My whole family's in New York too, so. But I'm just really super honored to be here with you guys, and really grateful that we're all in this field together, trying to do our part to create some world peace and dismantle all the layers of oppression that exist. So I'm humbled to be in this journey with you all. So as I said, I went to grad school back east. I literally wanted to go to grad school so that I could create world peace and dismantle racism. And I thought that therapy, being a social worker, would be a window into doing that. That was one of my motivations, to be truly honest. I had like 40 therapists when I was a kid. They all sucked. I kicked them all in the shin. I threw things. I was called like oppositional. I got tons of acronyms. I had a super high conflict divorce family growing up, and they just all threw me in individual therapy. And I remember being motivated to have a therapist I never had, and quickly kind of found this family therapy route and then FFT that I'll talk about. But for sure, I'm in it to dismantle racism, create world peace, and then there's a part of me that's trying to be a therapist I never had. So that's my short version of how I got here. I did my internship, in Colorado. First year was with the Mental Health Center. Second year was at the VA in Denver. My first job was working for an organization with the Mental Health Center called Impact, which is this really rad program that works with 12 agencies here to try to coordinate services for teenagers, especially in the juvenile justice system. So working with mental health, child welfare, probation, the DAs, GALs, the school system. And I was like ready to change the world, you know? And I know everyone kind of rolled their eyes of like, look at this new green therapist, just wait a second until she gets burnt out, right? So my first job was at a detention center called Platte Valley Youth Services, which is in Greeley, Colorado. And it's usually kind of age 10 to 18. And again, I was like, oh, I'm psyched. I'm going to go in and work with these kids and teach them how to do yoga and feel good about themselves and try to get them from this revolving door. So I drive about 2 hours up to Greeley every day. And I'll never forget, at that time, I had just a little nose stud. And my first day there, they're like, yeah, you got to take that out. That's contraband. Like, these kids are antisocial. They're going to use that against you. You can't wear earrings. And never, ever can you leave the door open with these kids, because they're antisocial, they're ODD, they're ADHD, they're pathological. And I was like, okay, I think you guys are all full of shit, but fine, right? So I took out the nose ring. And then I started working with these like beautiful, brilliant, smart, thoughtful, resilient, adaptable, courageous, fearless kids, 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. And I had a lot of resources and was going into jail and I could leave. And it was the worst environment. These 11-year-olds were shackled not even beds, not even cushions on their bed, very much fear-based, and if they walk, you walk in line and go 1, 2, 3. All the pod staff that work there were like, oh, thank God we have a therapist. These kids are just bad kids. Every single kid I saw, I always closed the door. I didn't leave it open. They were just brilliant and amazing, and no one was supporting them. I would sit at these meetings. I'd come back to Boulder. I'd sit in a room like this with about 20 folks, right? So there'd be the judge, public health department worker, the child welfare worker, principal, couple teachers at the school, individual therapists. And they would have a 45-minute slot, and they'd go around the room talking about all the risk factors. These families' risk factors, substance abuse, trauma, this kid is oppositional, and not one person in that room had met the kid. They'd come to me, and I'd be like, oh, I totally hear the concerns you guys have, I see that, but this kid is incredible, really smart, super thoughtful, has been through so much trauma, that yeah, he lives in his amygdala is hijacked all the time, but he's incredible. And I'm disheartened that no one has even met this kid, and you're just speaking to all, page this big of risk factors. And every time, you guys, and this was 2001, right, where I think strength-based treatment was getting a little buzz, but every meeting, it would just be like, he's the worst, the parent's the worst, and then they'd be like, let's talk about the strengths. Oh, Diane likes to play basketball. And that's what these meetings would say were strength-based treatment. I was horrified. I was like driving up and I'm like, yeah, I don't think I can create world peace or dismantle racism in this form. So I was about to quit, deliver flowers. I don't know what I wanted to do. And at that time, when I was so disenfranchised, there was this random acronym called FFT, and an even more acronym SAMHSA, which I had heard about, which is Substance Abuse Mental Health Association. And I heard this term evidence-based programs. And when I was at Smith, we didn't learn anything about evidence-based programs. It was super psychodynamic. It was very much about meeting the client where they're at, individually focused. So I was like, all right, what's this evidence-based FFT thing? At the time, Mental Health Center got this big grant to bring in FFT, Functional Family Therapy. This is 2003. So I read a little bit about it, and I'll be honest, it was like, here's this evidence-based program. It was developed by this white dude who's 65. There's all these fidelity measures. I don't know about doing an evidence-based model where someone tells me what to do. I'm not sure that jives with my core philosophy. But it said it was doing home-based work, and it was working with these kids and families. And I was like, right on. If I can work with these families, maybe I can connect a little more to why I want to be in this field. So I interviewed, got this job for FFT, and the first training, the developer of the model, Jim Alexander, came to Boulder and did the training. It was a 3-day training at the recycling center, right near the camp. I think you guys have another, I was going to say Efrons, right. But also, right, your campus.
Right there.
Yeah, and he developed this model, and I'll talk a little bit about the history. Did a 3-day training, and I was like, yeah, I think I'll quit. I'm not sure. This dude's telling me what to do, and this evidence-based stuff, what does that mean? So I was very skeptical and quite oppositional. But I decided to have a little faith. And I remember looking up the word faith back in 2003, and it said, believe something you can't see. And I was like, all right, maybe I'll have a little faith in this, because all this stuff that's working with these kids is not working. And I'm tired of seeing these kids who are brilliant come in and out of detention, and they get sent to residential treatment for 2 years. Started seeing families in this model. And this model is not a theory, it's a model. It's a fully integrated model where there's specific steps. So it's not just something like I can use a little mindfulness, or I can use a little narrative therapy here, or I can use a little my DBT, or I can use a little motivational interviewing, or I can borrow from some feminist. It was a fully integrated model. And again, as a Leo and someone who's super oppositional, I was like, oh, this is going to be a little too rigid to me. But I was amazed when I started following this model, the certain goals, using this framework and using consultation that we'll talk about in a sec, that these kids and families were getting better and getting better in a really short amount of time. And we were working with the whole family. So regardless of the referral behavior, mom using meth, kid being truant, kid cutting, we were not doing individual first. Doesn't mean that individual wasn't appropriate at some point, but we were working with the family system right from the bat. And I will start with maybe my biggest neon sign today, is that we believe in our model that every family has the right and should be anti-motivated for treatment. So let me check this, you guys. We're not working with private practice clinicians that are coming in and saying, I really want to work on my intimacy issues. I want to figure out what's holding me back. No, we're working with a 14-year-old, a 17-year-old, with a mom with 5 kids who's dealing with significant mental health issues, chronic homelessness, layers of racism, and has lost 2 of her previous kids from abuse. So we are not working with kids or families that are like, oh, I want to do this treatment. We are working with families that are anti-motivated. And it is our job at any FFT clinician throughout the world to create motivation. There is no such thing as a resistant kid or a resistant family. It's the therapist not figuring out how to match
Somebody take notes,
or
right?
understand this family. And we'll talk about this, you guys, and we'll rock out. We do not discourage, I believe in diagnoses, you guys. I believe in that, but that is not what defines what we do.
Right on.
And we work our butts off. And in fact, when we talk about, we have these fidelity measures. If a clinician cannot get traction with families, they don't get to do this model.
Right on.
And we hold people accountable because I call Comcast, which don't even get me started, but we have Comcast. And the first thing Comcast does, you guys, they say, this call is going to be monitored for quality assurance. Why is it that 99.9% of programs that work with kids and families have no quality assurance? It's not okay. These kids and families have been in pain and hopelessness for so long. And so the responsibility of what I'm about to talk about is on the clinician. It's about being fearless and non-judgmental, bless you. It is about doing anything it takes to create motivation. So no longer can the therapist say to me in our model, oh, this mom is really borderline and she can't do this, she needs individual. Or this kid is super oppositional. Or he's on the spectrum and he's not going to be able to understand this. No, we're not doing that anymore. We are saying every family deserves the highest quality of family therapy intervention, and we're going to do everything possible to remove those barriers. So when you have your first interaction with a family, it is the most strength-based, relational, and respect-based approach that you can have and you can be. Sorry, guys, I already started getting a little bit passionate. It's just a little bit of the build-up to what this is.
You guys are so lucky.
2003, I started doing this model. It's super oppositional. I don't like color in the lines, so I was kicking and screaming a little bit like my 2-year-old is starting to do. But then I had faith. And again, I was working with these families that have been in the system for so long. And so, oh, sorry.
We'll see her at some point.
I'll move over. Yeah, so started doing this model. Our caseloads typically are about like 12 to 14 cases, so we keep our caseloads really small. But we might see families like 3 times in the first 2 weeks. And again, we're working with the highest risk families in the community. Started using this model, started seeing changes. Length of stay, average, you guys, is between 3 or 6 months. So we're like Navy SEALs clinicians. We're highly skilled, but we get in and we get out. Wow. Was amazed at how culturally competent this model is, that I'll talk about a little bit later. I think that term gets thrown out a lot. And we are about understanding each family and their unique differences and how to show up for them in a respectful way. Started loving the model, became a supervisor, was supervising our program for about 10 years. And then in 2007, I became an FFT consultant, so I traveled the world training other clinicians. I talk to teams all over the country and all over the world every week. I listen to audio tapes, watch videotapes, look at everyone's notes, and go out there pretty often to do 2 or 3 days intensive training. So it's not just something you kind of utilize a little bit here. It's a whole model that's integrated, and folks that do FFT are part of a team. So you'll never meet a clinician just doing FFT alone. So we have at least 3 FFT therapists on a team, up to 8. And right now we have about 500 different teams in about 16 different countries. So again, just trying to give you a little bit of the background before I jump into the philosophy and the model. As I know Diane spoke to you guys, and I think a lot of you are doing individual and some of you are doing family work. Like I said earlier, we are a family-based model. So everything we do is with the family. I think you can sort of hear already based on what I've been talking about, but this is not just a model, it's a way of being. Like, we are a missions, value-driven agency. So I can pretty quickly, when I train new clinicians, I can kind of tell in the first 5 minutes if you're not going to work out as an FFT therapist. I know no one here believes this, but if you believe like people are inherently bad, you're not going to be able to do this model. Mm-hmm. Like, behavior can be so misguided, egregious, but we do not believe that people are bad. And we will always hold people accountable. No one gets a free pass for bad behavior, but we do it with dignity, and we do it trusting the model.
Do you think can they see that, do you think, in the film?
Yeah.
Yeah?
They'll be able to see the screen.
I'll also send this PowerPoint that I created for you guys to Diane too, and any follow-up you guys need, you can always email me. But. So, yeah, please.
Do you want to be visible in the video?
Yeah, I was trying to did you like how I was trying to sneakily,
You don't have to be.
You don't have
Maybe
to.
I'll-
You can just talk.
I'm just enjoying kind of seeing you guys
Yeah.
rather than being there, but
Maybe at the end, she'll just spend a few minutes in front so people know who she is.
Totally cool.
maybe I'll
Sorry.
add a video of my daughter saying, here's who I am.
Oh, that's great, that's great.
So, as you can tell, as I started today, it's a philosophy, it's a way of being. I will argue this is not just a treatment intervention, I will argue it's a social change model. We are impacting the way people experience themselves and others. And so everything we do has to be funneled through this strength-based, non-judgmental, relational approach that I've been speaking to already. We are a family-focused intervention that is hyper-focused on what we call balancing alliances. So when I'm working with all of you, I want to make sure at the end of my session that all of you feel like I got your back. Even if Diane's like, you don't understand, Marnie, my kid is the worst kid ever. I wish I aborted him and never had him. That I want, by the end of the day, when I use the techniques in this model, that both kid and mom feel like, oh, she's got my back. It doesn't mean we don't hold people accountable, but everything we do is about this alliance. It's about making sure, and you guys, right, whether you use the word therapeutic alliance or working relationship, whatever that is for you guys, that's key for us in the family therapy world. We don't take sides. And again, being non-judgmental does not mean we don't hold people accountable. We hold people accountable, and I'll give you some examples around what that looks like. But we're always about not taking sides and not overly focusing on one person or the other, regardless of the referral behavior. We are super focused on protective factors and strength-based, but I have a major neck twitch, you guys, because I think our field thinks that strength-based is, the kid likes basketball and he plays the guitar. That is not what we're talking about. There are so many strengths in the most maladaptive risk factors, and we know that. Our job is to unlock those strengths that are in those risk factors, right? As a fairly new parent, the first year with my daughter, if I could get meth, ice, anything, give it to me through an intravenous, because parenting is the hardest thing I've ever been a part of. I love my daughter so much, but I was not prepared for the stress and vulnerability. Is anyone here a parent? The stress and vulnerability and minefield of shame and self-doubt, and I lost my I feel like my partner and I were rock stars, and I'm like, where's my partner? It's the most selfless experience of my life. I'm so grateful, but everyone's like, oh, this is gonna be rainbows and unicorns. What the H were they talking about? I wish I could have used any drug possible. And I have such respect for the parents we're working with that are single parents dealing with 5 kids. Thank God they're smoking weed every day. Because if they weren't smoking weed every day, they'd be putting cigarette burns on their kids. Thank God that mom leaves at night and goes out and goes to the bar so that she can get a break instead of hurting her kids.
Right on.
I am not minimizing the risks that our families go through. But come on, parenting and then parenting with so few resources, the last thing someone needs is someone to come in and tell them they're a bad parent. And at the core, I will say the most pressing risk factor, hands down, if we get a family with domestic violence, a kid cutting, meth use, ice use, running away, truancy, that is not the most significant risk factor ever. The most significant risk factor is hopelessness. And our families are bleeding out. And if Sam, I don't want to put bad energy, but if Sam leaves today and gets hit by a car, she doesn't die, but Sam gets hit by a car and she goes to the hospital and she's bleeding out, and we think she's got a brain injury, definitely, she's got a compound leg fracture, hurt, elbows cut up, what's the first thing an ER technician will do? Quiz.
Stop the bleeding.
Stop the bleeding. We have to stop the metaphorical bleeding. So I don't care what the risk factors are, our families are bleeding out. And it's been too long where people go in and judge them and pathologize them. And too long where people use fear and shame to try to create change. We must stop the bleeding first. And so when I start unpacking the model, we have a very elegant way that we start working with families, and we will not move to what we call behavior change, to teaching skills, until we've created hope and reduced that negativity and blame. and created a motivational context for change where families are not solely defined in those negativity and that risk factor, and those risk factors. I definitely can tell I'm preaching to the choir, so this is not new. You guys, I mean, I feel like if you come into this field, you want to make a difference. You don't want to come in and say, yeah, you're a bad person, and you're just your pathology, and you're just your access to-ness. No, that's not who we are. But too often families define themselves like, oh, I'm a drug addict, or I'm a bad kid. And no one creates change based on those negative beliefs about themselves. So this overriding relational approach, again, it's not rainbows and unicorns, you guys. It's not like, oh, cool, you guys are amazing. It's acknowledging and wallowing in all the negativity and blame, but trying to give families hope within that. And at the same time, we're very specific and individualized. Not individual treatment, but we're individualized in how we use this model. So yeah, Boulder, right down the street, you've got 6 therapists that are using FFT. Last night I was talking to my team in Sydney, Australia, that are using FFT. I have a team in Singapore. I have a team in Compton. I have a team in Michigan, Minnesota, Seattle. Everyone's doing the same exact model. How they do it is going to look different around the families they're working with, and we'll talk about what that looks like. But it's the same model across all the places we work with. And again, everything we do is relational, 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 relational. So I'm picking on Sam and Francesca. Francesca's like, Sam's the worst. I can't stand her. She's cutting. You don't understand how bad she is. Marnie, send her to jail. Put her in, scared straight. I am not going to spend half an hour saying, how does that make you feel, Sam? Because if I say, how does that make you feel, do you think that's going to increase hope or reduce hope?
Decrease.
Yeah, well, how do you think it makes Sam feel? Horrible. I'm going to try to figure out, like, Francesca, what is it? Remind me, what's your profession? And let's just say you're like a nurse. And you've been a nurse for like 14 years. So you're like so skilled at people following your directions, having an impact. What's that like for you to feel like you can't impact your daughter and you're not able to get through to her?
No control.
Right, no control. That's interesting because, Sam, that's the same thing I imagine is going on for you. This idea of no control lives with both of you. We are going to right away take out that individual behavior and put it between people. And I would argue, not to geek out on neurobiology, but I would argue when you make things relational, you increase oxytocin, you reduce cortisol, you increase serotonin. So I almost wish we had like MRI scans that the minute you make things about the space between people, it takes away that negativity and blame and actually literally starts changing brain chemistry.
Whoa. Okay.
Sorry, I'll breathe. Should I breathe for a sec?
Sorry, guys. Train. Then maybe I'll go back to therapy. Who's interested? We'll put a training group together.
So this relational approach is so powerful. Not easy. It's not easy what I'm asking my therapist to do, to sit and wallow in all this pain and discomfort. But we gotta get people to feel like they belong to each other. Because we'll argue at the end of the day that if you don't feel like you belong, and you don't feel like loved in your core sense of family, then bad stuff is going to happen. And you're going to feel hurt, you're going to do bad things. But if we can create this idea, this relational approach, and no matter how bad things get, that your family's always got your back, we're going to make some big impact. I talked a little bit about risk and protective factors, and we'll go back to that in a sec. So we have FFT, which I know, as Diane said, Marnie, can you come speak about FFT? And FFT has been around for about 40 years. And the FFT approach is any kid 11 to 18, any kid regardless of referral behaviors, we'll do FFT with. In the juvenile justice system or in the child welfare system. But the last 7 years, we've expanded our criteria to 0 to 18. So a lot of the work I've been doing the last 5 years is what we call FFT-CW. So it's called Functional Family Therapy Child Welfare. So we've opened up our population so that most of my work now, when I'm doing FFT-CW work, is, a parent who has meth, significant neglect and abuse. Instead of removing the kids, can we go in and see if we can help create some protective factors, reduce risk factors, keep the kids healthy at home, but not remove them? And I'm going to unpack a little bit about this kind of life-changing project we're doing in Australia right now that we just finished our first year. But on general, we're like 3 to 4 months, and again, I'll rock out about the phases and how we do things.
So the CW is from 0 to 11?
0 to 18.
0 to 18. Mm-hmm. So there's two, so FFCTW is the whole new thing.
So FFT has been around for about 40 years, and in the last 8 years, we've done what we call an adaptation, which to be an evidence-based program, you have to have multiple site replication, there has to be sustained outcomes, there has to be fidelity measures. You have to have a certain way that you disseminate the program, but throughout this process, we did a bunch of piloting work in New York in all 5 boroughs. And so we now have FFT and FFT-CW.
So it's 2 different.
Yeah, I would say 85% same model. The big difference is that we've just expanded that age range. And then as you guys can imagine, if I'm working with Francesca and Sam, if Sam's 2 months old, we're still relational, but I'm not going to be like, yo, Sam, I think your mom's using drugs because she's trying to take care of you. Like, our reframing process and our techniques will be more through the parent. But we're having incredible success keeping kids safely at home with pretty horrendous risk factors.
So then you're maybe decreasing the social services, taking the kids away.
Exactly. So we are partnering with social services to say, hey, before you do your old school thing and go in and scare the parent and say, like, we're going to take your kids or we are, will you let us go in and do our magic? And I promise we'll partner with you. If the kids aren't safe, we're not keeping the kids there. But our outcomes have been incredible. We're keeping kids safely in the home and empowering families so that they don't enter the child welfare system. Because you guys all know too much that the most significant factor in recidivism, so people going in and out of juvenile justice or child welfare, is being involved one time before. It's not gang use, it's not substance abuse, it's not cutting, it's not neglect, it's not DV. It's the minute you step into this system, you never get out.
Yep.
How do you think that is?
What?
Why?
Oh, I mean, with all due respect to the systems we work with, they're like super old school and they wear this big button that's like, this is how we've always done things. And our systems that are so well intended, they're procedural based, they're checkbox based, they're risk aversive. I don't think child welfare workers are taught about the countertransference and how to motivate families. They've got 500 clients, and guess what? The cover of the Daily Camera is not this like amazing social worker that's helped 100 kids. The cover of the Daily Camera is a 2-year-old got killed when they were with their family and child welfare didn't remove them. Child welfare systems are so overburdened. I feel like they're inherently racist. They don't understand the layers of racism. They're not given a ton of cultural competence training. There's high burnout. There's not a system that supports them. And so this is all they know. And we're like literally subversive. We're like putting an X to that, and we're trying to be like first responders, where we're like running into the house on fire and saying like, we got the skills and tools, but we're going to have that bravery and that courage to try to support families in a new way. And it's not easy, because systems are like, what? This is how we've always done things. And so much of our model is also partnering. We also feel like there's no such thing as a resistant system, which is harder for me. Like, sometimes, I'm like, some of the folks I work with, I'm like, yeah, why don't you just work at the bank or something, because you hate kids. You know what I mean? I don't think it's going to work. If you came to my house, I would not be motivated to work with you. So you put a system that's like super risk aversive, negative, blaming, racist with families that are exhausted, bleeding out, dealing with racism, poverty, substance abuse issues, and you put these two systems together and you expect change? No way. We got to do it differently.
So again, let's hear the model. After Allison, let's hear the model, and then we'll have questions.
Sure.
Yeah.
Also, a lot of the system is profit-based.
Yeah.
So it's privately owned profit-based. So the system doesn't gain from helping folks. The system gains from having people return.
Yeah.
I want to work ourselves out of a job if you're working with adult. I want to work myself out of a job. I want to put all my efforts into early intervention and prevention so that I never have to see an 11 to 18-year-old, because we did this rock star work early on. All right, I'll just tell you a little bit of where we are, and then I promise we'll go in the model, talk about the model. So yeah, I was saying all over the world. I'll just speak a little bit about my experience. So New Mexico, Watts, Compton, Napa, Stockton, someone said Sonoma. What? Stockton, yeah. So I've had 5 different sites in Stockton. Rad therapists that we're working with. We have about 60 sites in California. Elkhorn, Wisconsin. I know there's some Midwest folks. I will say that it's more of a cultural shock for me going to Elkhorn, Wisconsin than it is like Singapore, but we could have a different story about that later. Yeah, Bronx, Brooklyn, Westchester, Albany, Fort Worth, Dallas, Austin, Minneapolis. I heard a couple. Yay Vikings. Minnesota, Milwaukee, Greeley, Denver, Boulder, South Dakota. I parked next to a West Virginia car. Is anyone here from West Virginia?
Somebody.
So someone I parked next, we just started this big statewide project in West Virginia, which has been fascinating, like in Appalachia. I have such a, I won't go on a tangent, but I have such an appreciation for folks that voted for people that I struggle with, just seeing the kind of levels of poverty that folks live with and trying to grasp on to anyone or anything that's going to help them get out of poverty. West Virginia has been fascinating. Georgia, Baton Rouge, we have about 45 agencies in Louisiana doing FFT. The entire state system is only giving funding for these high-risk families if you're doing an evidence-based program. We work in child welfare, probation, mental health, diversion, reentry. But here's where I'm going to make you guys work a little bit. So here's some pictures. Where's that?
Singapore.
Yes. So we have 3 sites in Singapore. One of the most interesting countries I've ever been to. And again, we're working with like 11 to 18-year-olds. So a lot of our referrals would be, yeah, Johnny smoking, which I'm really comfortable with, or I'm used to here. But it took me a little bit of time because when they said Johnny smoking, it wasn't smoking weed, it was smoking a cigarette. Kid placed on probation for 2 years because they were being disrespectful to their parents. The referral behaviors were so different in Singapore based on just the cultural context in Singapore, which is really interesting, but the same themes that I see in Boulder or in Compton. So shout out to Singapore, we can talk more about that. I don't know if you can you guys make that out?
Is that a wind turbine?
Okay, so a guess over here is a wind turbine. Sean, is that right?
Yeah,
Sean, any other guesses? Wind turbine? I've never heard that guess. Anyone else have an idea of what that is? What?
Like sauna?
Okay, sauna. It's really hard to see. Anyone else? Can you make out? So we got wind turbine, sauna. Did someone say Norway over there?
I said Norway.
No. So this is a marae. Has anyone been to New Zealand?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've been in New Zealand for 10 years, and we have about 8 sites. And the first time I went there was 10 years ago. And before I did 1 day of training, the elders, the kuya, Pita, said, yeah, you're a pakia, which is a synonym for a white person, and you have this white evidence-based whatever this is. You will spend 5 days on this marae with me, and before I trust you with my people, I want to feel your heart. Mm-hmm. So this was my first day 10 years ago, almost to the date, and that's a marae. So a marae is a meeting house. In New Zealand, they brought us over specifically to try to work with Maori kids and families because there was such a disproportionate rate of Maori kids and families in the system. And there are these beautiful maraes where communities belong to. And so this marae is now my marae, where I have whānau, which is a Maori word for family. And anytime I go to New Zealand, I'll spend a couple nights there, sort of sleeping on pads like this with all of the ancestors and connecting to land. And so Pita said, yeah, we'll spend 5 days here, and then I'll see if you'll train my people. Every single therapist in New Zealand, if you're not Maori, if you're a pakia, if you're a white person, you need to have 5 hours of cultural supervision in addition to our model, because you need tons of cultural support around how to work with families. I would love if in America, if you're working with families, you have to have at least 5 hours of cultural supervision with each family you work with to understand your white privilege and figure out how to show up respectfully. I'm sure you guys have that here, 5 hours. Yeah. So this is a marae. I do like wind turbine and what's your name? Greg. I love Greg. Was like sauna, close, but New Zealand. So we have tons of agencies in New Zealand. Okay, this is a quick one. What flag?
UK.
Yes, you guys. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just wondering if you had any in Hawaii.
Yeah, we have 4 teams in Hawaii. Yeah, my dear colleague is the consultant. So she's like, gotta go to Hawaii for training. We're like, oh, that's too hard for you. All right, who's this? Yes.
What?
Who said that?
Lady Gaga.
Nice.
Lady
What's
Gaga.
your name? Alec, nice work. I thought you were going to say sauna or wind turbine. One of the projects I've been most passionate about and so humbled, about 7 years ago, Lady Gaga donated $5 million to Little Monsters, right? Or her fans? Is that right? Little Monsters. And she wanted to donate $5 million to work with LGBTQ youth in New York. And she had all of her Little Monsters vote on 14 different agencies that work with kids and families. And this one agency that got the money was called Green Chimneys / St. Christopher's organization. They've been around for a long time, exclusively working with LGBT youth who have been kicked out of their home for sexual orientation or gender identity stuff. And this agency won this contract and they brought in FFT, and I was so honored to be their consultant. So we were working with kids that were kicked out of their home by their parents for a variety of reasons, and putting them all in the room and seeing their goodness and trying to connect them. And I will tell you that these therapists I worked with, so brilliant, you guys, like had been in the field for like 10, 15 years, exclusively working with LGBTQ kids, individual therapy, and they were like throwing darts at me when I talked about in that first day that like, yeah, I want to figure out how we can get those parents and hold them accountable, but maybe try to understand where they're coming from. Because the goal, right, is if we can, it wasn't that like every family joined PFLAG when we were done, but guess what, some families did. Because we didn't judge them. We didn't say like, how could you say that to your kid? I can't imagine what it must be like for you to kick your kid out solely because they said they came out to you. Wow. And we would dig and wallow, and we had incredible outcomes. So shout out to Lady Gaga. I just saw Star is Born last night. Still like puffy from crying, and I can't get the song Shallow out of my head if anyone, sorry about that. All right, quick geography. Yeah, nice work. So near and dear to my heart, we have 25 agencies that we just started in this last year. And check us out, you guys, unbelievable. The child welfare system, some of you probably know about the stolen generation. Horrific. Kids were taken from their families being Aboriginal and placed in white homes because the system and the government said, like, yeah, you're at risk being with your Aboriginal families. Australia is the nicest racist country I've ever been to. I thought I could see comparisons with my work with Maori kids and families in New Zealand. There's no comparison. There are so many layers of racism and oppression that I'm dumbfounded by every day. It's so sobering, and there's almost what they're now calling the second stolen generation, where child welfare systems are removing kids, and exclusively Aboriginal kids. Not under the policy of a stolen generation, but very similar. So mad props I have. The child welfare system spent 5 years studying and researching evidence-based programs, reinvested $90 million, and brought FFT over to Australia. We started in New South Wales, which is in the Sydney area. Just finished our first year, and really high-risk families, domestic violence, meth, ICE, and we're keeping families together and we're doing it safely. Really horrific kind of what colonization has done to Aboriginal families, and I know there's similar themes with First Nation folks both in America and Canada and all over the world. I've been amazed at the levels of racism that exist and how governments have played a role in that, but we're trying to, bust that up. I've been to Australia 14 times in the last 2 years.
Oh my God.
So a bit heartbreaking to be away from my baby, but she knows I go to Australia, my daughter knows I'm coming back. But really proud of the work we're starting to do there. This you guys won't be familiar with, but I was saying that we've been in New South Wales. Now we're expanding to Canberra, which is in the ACT, which is the capital. This organization, Guga Ngawlan, is an exclusive Aboriginal agency that only works with Aboriginal families and Aboriginal clinicians. Wow. And after 5 years of working to partner, they've brought FFT in. I'm going there tomorrow, 2 days. And we're working in the ACT. Their child outplacement rates are horrific, and it's mostly Aboriginal families. There's not one family in Canberra that hasn't been impacted by the stolen generation. So many of the parents we're working with were removed from their families when they were kids. So really powerful project that we're working on. And as I've been speaking about today, like I said, the values are what drive our model, and I'll tell you a little bit about the different phases, but you can't do this model if you're not flexible and humble and compassionate and directive and warm. Usually most of the clinicians I train are like, Marnie, I'm cool with humble, compassionate, I can be flexible and warm, but the directive part of our model is can prove to be a bit of a challenge because we're quite directive in what we do and how we do it. We're not a model that's like, hey, let's like meet you where you are and tell me how you feel and let me just sort of connect with you. We make change really quickly, and we work very hard to do that. In order to do that, these clinicians around the world have to be fearless, fearless, fearless. So finally, sorry all that yappiness and talking I was just doing to set the context for the model. We're a 5-phase model. So every phase in our model has specific goals, and it's a very synergetic model, but in order to move to the next phase, you got to meet your goals. So I don't want to minimize or oversimplify the different phases, but in our model we have what we call engagement, which is a little different than probably when you guys think of the word engagement. We have something called the motivation phase. We have a phase called the relational assessment phase. We have a phase called behavior change, which you guys are very familiar, where we teach mindfulness and coping skills, and harm reduction, and urge surfing, and communication, and parenting, and all that beautiful stuff. And then the last part of our model is generalization. We do this, regardless of the risk factors, very quickly. So 3 to 6 months is our average. Like I said, we might have our first 3 sessions in the first 10 days, because those families are bleeding out. Most of our work is in the home. Again, like I said, could be 0 to 18 or 11 to 18. And on the bookends, pre-treatment is not a actual phase, but it's just the work we do to establish relationships with the folks we're working with, and then post-treatment to make sure families are set up so they can be successful without us. Our goal is to get in and out as quick as possible. Another neon sign I want to highlight, you guys, that tell me if this resonates with all of you. A day has a beginning, a middle, and end. The moon phases have a beginning, middle, and end. Presidency has a beginning, middle, and end. Sorry. Tell me more. A weekend has a beginning, middle, and end. A book has a beginning, middle, and end. A movie. Why is it that treatment? There are so many families that I worked with that never had an ending to treatment. It is unethical. Again, I'm not saying for all of us. I love my individual therapist. I've been in therapy since I was 2. I love going to talk about myself. I love couples therapy. There's no ending to therapy on my end. But that's not the population we're working with. There must be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we're very specific and strategic about how we do that. Quick kind of speed dating through these phases, but the engagement phase, we call it the engagement phase, basically begging, stalking, doing anything it takes on the phone with a family member to get them to have the first session. It's not scheduling a root canal, right? It's not saying, hey, I have availability next week at 5 p.m. and that's all I have. We do anything we can in that first contact with the family so that the family members have a different experience of a professional they've never had before. So engagement happens really quickly, just that first phone call. The magic in our model, where I spend 95% of my training, to be honest, is in the motivation phase. I would argue that's not just our model in anything. Creating a motivational context for change is so much easier said than done. To just say, stop drinking, doesn't have any impact. This is your brain on drugs. Doesn't have any impact. Scared straight, say no to drugs, all that stuff gets a lot of money, has no impact. So in the motivation phase, typically, you guys, it's 2 or 3 sessions, and it is all about the therapist using what we call change focus and change meaning techniques to create hope, to reduce negativity and blame, to make it relational, and to balance those alliances. So we do not spend time saying, what do you want to do to change? If I had a magic wand, what would you do differently? No, we go in with a really thoughtful plan of maybe some themes behind why Sam is punching her brother, why Francesca is using drugs. We come in with hypotheses. We come in, and it's actually quite narrative for those of you that study narrative approaches. We try to create a new story, so these families aren't defined in their old stories. And these new stories have to connect everyone together. And it can't be overly sort of Pollyanna. It has to acknowledge all the bad stuff, but we try to redefine and honestly rewrite stories. So this motivation phase, conceptually, I know makes a lot of sense, but we spend most of our time videotaping, audio taping, giving a lot of feedback for therapists around using these certain techniques to create change. These first couple sessions, you never ask, what can we do differently? I want to give you skills to communicate differently. Clearly you have a substance abuse issue. I want to teach you urge surfing. On a scale of 1 to 10, what do you think? No, these first couple of sessions are all around the therapist, almost like Oprah Winfrey, creating motivational context for change. And if you leave your first session and you haven't met any of your goals, increasing hope, reducing negativity and blame, balancing the alliance, or creating relational focus, you're back the next day, because those families are still bleeding out. You guys okay? I'm like so aggressive. I need to chill out. But that's first phase.
Don't chill
out. Will you guys record that for my wife, please? Everyone said don't chill. Oh, wait, no, everyone said don't chill out. Okay, don't chill out. The whole Naropa class told me not to chill out.
Don't chill the fuck out.
I'm gonna wear that, you guys. So first phase engagement, second phase motivation. This is, again, we spend most of our time videotaping, audio taping. Every clinician gets fidelity measures, which I know sounds scary, but like Comcast, we hold people accountable. So I'm working with clinicians that might be, trying to do the model, but they're being really negative. They're not trusting the model, so I'm going to give them a lot of feedback around what to do in the next session. We also believe you can't wing it. So my pilot last week, guys, she flew from LaGuardia, shout out to Diane, to Denver. We had tons of turbulence, there was weather. She had a flight plan, and she stuck to the flight plan, and we ended in Denver. So many of the clinicians I work with who are so well-intended, they go in with a plan, and then there's turbulence, and then they end up in Hawaii because they don't follow their flight plan. So we have probably an hour planning at least into every session that you have with the family, and probably an hour and a half reflection of every family you have. So we keep our caseloads small, but the planning and preparation, I say, is where the magic is. So we expect turbulence, but we have to have all these levels of techniques to manage that, and we get really specific around it. So we got motivation, friends. Relational assessment, I don't want to overcomplicate things, but long story short, in FFT, it's a bit radical and different. We look at every dyad in a family. So like Diane and Allison, let's say Allison's the daughter, Diane's mom. We look at the pattern over time. Diane to Allison, is her behavior motivated by like a lot of connection with her daughter, a lot of space, or a blend? Allison to mom, is her behavior motivated like a lot of connection with her mom, or a lot of space, or a blend? And at the core of FFT, it's a really big hallmark of what we do. We believe that you can be a rock star autonomous parent, a rock star contacting parent, or a rock star parent that has a lot of time with their kids and a lot of time apart. We do not change that. This is a big deal because a lot of family therapy programs might try to change, oh, if you just hug your kid more, they're going to be better. Or I know you have 3 jobs, Diane, and I know you've got 5 kids, but you've got to drop those jobs because clearly your kids are acting out because they need you home. We also, this is kind of radical, we have something called hierarchy. So who has most influence in a relationship? And we don't try to make parents one up. So you might have kids based on power, position, or resources that are one up. They have more influence on their parent. When I was in grad school, they might have said the term parentified. We don't believe in that term. It's a kid that has a lot of influence on the parent. And that might be cultural, that might be in response to substance abuse, whatever that is, we're not changing that. We are working with what is. Huge shout out, personal, for me, I was in therapy for so long because I thought I had intimacy issues because I'm highly autonomous. You guys, you heard? I'm in Australia, trying to create world peace, and I always thought like I had to be really contacting to be a good partner. It's not true. I can be a great, and I'm an autonomous parent, and I would challenge anyone here to challenge my love for my daughter Stevie. My daughter is the most incredible kid in my life. If you told me I had to be a stay-at-home mom, I would be on meth, using ICE and open to child welfare services. I have to be on, it's my wife, super contacting to Stevie. Awesome. No one's better or worse. That's just how we are. Mm-hmm. So it's a really big deal. Because we're so short term, we're not trying to change these relational dyads. It also helps, not just in this model, but think about different relationships in different ways. My parents are very contacting to me. I always am like, just trying to text them back. Like, I don't want to talk on the phone. But then I found this app called Slidial, which there's this app where you go to the app, this is totally not even clinically related. You go to, so my parents are all contacting. Everyone wants more time. I don't mean to sound cocky, but I'm like, I'm just trying to create world peace, everyone leave me alone. So there's this app that's free, and it calls my mom, but it doesn't ring, it goes right to her voicemail. So, you guys, true story, I've been using this app for a year and a half, and my mom is like, oh, sweetie, I missed your phone call. I can't believe you called from Singapore. But when I give her a voicemail, that meets her contacting need, and it lets me be autonomous. Woo! Slidial. If you don't remember anything else, what?
Looks like you called, but you didn't.
Totally. If you don't remember anything else in my training, it's Slidial. But it's really amazing because we pathologize. You guys, people get pathologized that you should be, especially around some gender stuff, that to be a good mom, you have to be contacting. If you're autonomous, you're cold and withdrawn. No. Some of the best autonomous parents provided their kids structure and safety. And like, you know what, I have food and shelter. Go out in the world and be strong. A version of a contacting parent that is maladaptive is that like hovering parent. So there's no good or bad version. We're just going to work with what is. It's freeing, especially with the families we're working with. We're not going to do any of this judgmental stuff. And we believe if you match to these relational assessments, the change is gonna be a much more long-lasting change than just short-term. I could talk about relational assessment forever, but just a quick shout out to relational assessment. And then we will not go to behavior change. We will not teach skills or have families do something differently unless we've done engagement, motivation, and that relational assessment. Once we go into behavior change, this should all be familiar, you guys. This is where you're teaching mindfulness. Some families, you're getting them in yoga poses and crow poses to reset their central nervous system. Other families are doing really basic communication validation. Other families are doing really nuanced parenting things. Other families are doing problem solving, conflict management. Other families are targeting substance abuse. We're bringing in DBT skills, CBT skills, acceptance commitment therapy skills. In FFT, we can use everything out there in the literature, out there in practice, but we're going to match it to families, and we are not going to teach it until motivation's been enhanced. So, plethora of techniques and tools you can use in BC will always work it through the family. And then lastly, generalization, like I was saying, beginning, middle, and ending. Generalization is a phase in of itself that we prepare families for relapse. We say, yo, you're going to have ups and downs. That's what this sort of journey is. So we're going to give you a really dialed-in relapse plan. We're also going to make sure you have the right services to continue this healing process. So guess what, you guys? Maybe it is formal individual therapy, you know? Yeah. Maybe I am the 14-year-old that I work with the whole family. I send to Sean for individual treatment to do some mindfulness and really work on some kind of coping skills because she still really struggles with self-image and self-esteem. But I promise you, when I send her to Sean after we've changed that family system, that's going to have a lot more impact than if I just sent her to Sean and nothing changed at home. So in generalization, we're going to bring in other resources. We're going to connect them. And then we're also going to generalize the changes we made when we were in that BC phase. So Alex, right? Alex and Alec and what's your name? In the red.
Michelle.
Sorry, Michelle. Michelle's like, what color am I? So Alec and Michelle, if I worked with the two of you for like 6 or 7 sessions around some coping skills, some mindfulness techniques, some urge surfing, I then would generalize that in this phase to like, Alec, when you get really frustrated in Diane in class, and you're like, oh, I can't believe she... Okay, use that mindfulness technique that we use with your daughter. So we're going to literally generalize those changes we make to other arenas. Again, you guys, to empower families to do this without us, because more is not better. And most of these systems we work with are like, no, you can't end. They've only been working with you for 3 months. And I'm like, all the risk factors, all the dynamic risk factors have decreased. And they're like, yeah, but this family's high risk. You guys, more is not better. So give them skills and then we get out of their way. And we do this in relatively short amount of time because of the planning and preparation.
Because you're changing the world.
Because we're trying to dismantle racism and change the world. Let me pause. Take a deep breath around that model.
Okay.
Questions about this philosophy, the model, the history?
Marnie, do you want to stand for 1 minute, just, or do you not want to be in the picture? Because you
I
don't
was
have
just
to be.
thinking I would stand in my, I'll see if my foot can, give me a second, I'll just wake up my
yeah.
sleep.
But I don't know, maybe you don't want to be in the camera, really.
No, I just like being
Good.
with you guys.
Okay, that's perfect.
But
Then let's trust that. Let's
What?
totally trust that.
Yeah, I mean, I
Honor
usually do this training, you guys, in like, let's see, we do, for a new team that works, I'll go out there 14 days in the first year, and I talk to them every week. So I try to condense what we're doing in like an hour. But questions and comments about this work, yeah.
So, you were talking about how like in the beginning everybody was like, wow, she's so like motivated and she's gonna burn out and blah, blah, blah. So how do you resource yourself? Because obviously you're still really super motivated.
Yeah, will you guys tell me if you agree
You
with...
repeat the question?
Sure.
How do you stay motivated for the camera?
Yeah. How do you stay motivated? Because early on people are like, oh, you're gonna burn out. And you guys please add to this with research and your own anecdotal experience. So I would argue, and I'm totally open to you guys challenging this, I would argue folks burn out in the field, not because of the families, not because of low pay, not because of high burnout, not because of the stress that the families we're working with. I would argue that people burn out because they don't feel effective.
Yeah.
I feel like if you don't feel effective at what you do, that risk of burnout is so extreme. And I would also argue that burnout is not the external factors, it's the internal factors. I suck, I'm not good at this, I'm not gonna make the change I want, I'm anxious, I'm overwhelmed, right? How in the world am I gonna impact racism? But the reason why I like dream, bleed, live this model is that I feel like this is a